Housed within the walls of the Library of Congress's rare book room are many of the finest work of early literature, including some by the master of the fable, Aesop.
Aesop goes back to the Romans and the Greeks, but one reason why they are still, you could say, exploited today, because they have very straightforward rules for good and clean living, and they have usually a moral at the end of the story. Most of the time they use animals as a symbol of a certain behavior, and they are very straightforward in the sense that they have the good and the bad, the big, fierce animal, and the small and the clever, and so forth.
Aesop's fables have survived countless generations of young and old. The lion and the bull, the frog and the fox, the grasshopper and the ant, icons and symbols that resonate with lessons that are still with us.
You can make of the tales anything your heart desires, because they are public domain, public property. The interpretations are yours. It's as you live, as you read, you see.
These symbols or these stories are basic human truths, and they will remain, and I think they continue to uplift us because there's something permanent and eternal about them.
Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night.
English poet and painter William Blake, author of these cherished and familiar words, is another such master of the symbolic.
There are things in the poem that I cannot literally explain. When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, I can't exactly explain why that works. It makes what I call not common sense, but uncommon sense in poetry.
Blake's earliest well-known works, Songs of Innocence and Songs of Experience, speak of the two aspects of the human soul. Both books reside in the library's rare book room. This thoughtful series of lyrics, which Blake illustrated in glorious detail, are written in the simple form of children's poems.
What I liked about Blake when I first read him, and I read him when I was a child, was that it wasn't for grown-ups and it wasn't for children, it was for everybody. But it's the child in all of us that he's really talking to, not just the chronological child.
The symbolism in fairy tales is tremendously useful because there is magic. There is the once upon a time, they're set. They're not today. They're not anywhere, but they are immediate. And they deal with, they touch matters that children wonder about.
The characters become symbolic, archetypes of behavior, as they search for things like the meaning of loyalty, honor, and perseverance.
The archetypal symbol that really relates to you as an individual and where you are going and what you have to deal with, the tensions between the conscious and the unconscious.
People have had a lovely time reading symbols. The psychoanalysts have had a perfectly spiffy time with them. I mean, all of this, think of the delight Freud had finding meaning here, meaning there, which he could shape to his own theories. You have Jung taking the opposite, shaping the same material to his, shall we say, more spiritual approach.
Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung were at the forefront of defining the importance and meaning of symbols buried within the psyche of man. For Freud, symbols developed in the childhood experiences of the individual. Jung believed symbols were a part of every unconscious mind throughout all times and across all cultures.
Well, there are two parts of the unconscious in Jungian psychology. One is the personal unconscious, where the experience of the world as we know it, for day-to-day experience, is the main object of the dream. But there's also a 2 million-year-old human being that represents the entire history of the human race, and we all have it. And sometimes from that part of the unconscious, which he calls the collective unconscious, emerge these symbols, the circle, the monster, the dragon, things like that, that don't exist in the world, but exist in the soul, in the psyche of man.
In its traditional definition, icons are most often associated with religious imagery. In particular, the stylized paintings of the Eastern Orthodox Church. These two-dimensional paintings and mosaics recall the teachings of the Bible with scenic depictions of its narrative. The same images permeate from one generation to the next. Painted by artists known as iconographers, their meaning endures. Singular images with the power to recall entire stories.
Iconography is the Christian art form that grew up in the eastern part of the Roman Empire after Constantine. It's representational art. That means you have figures, saints, the images of Christ, the Mother of God, Mary, and it, to a great extent, illustrates Old Testament and New Testament. It also is used in a liturgical sense to decorate interiors of churches. And it's not simply decoration. The images that are created in iconography are meant to function. That means the faithful actually connect to these images and focus themselves in prayer by using these images. As an iconographer, basically I view myself as a channel. The icon is not meant to be a work of art that is meant to bring glory to the artist. The icon is meant to be a tool for prayer, for meditation, and the artist steps aside.
Although there are various styles of iconography in the Eastern Orthodox Church, the making of a specific religious figure follows strictly defined storylines.
Meaning for most of us, or for all humanity, comes from story. And without a narrative, there's no meaning. The loss of story in contemporary religious culture is an impoverishing phenomenon.
Artists have long attempted to visualize their concepts of the unknown and capture the imagery of spiritual transformation. Because such things are entirely subjective, the work is rich in symbolism.
With a mother holding the earth, the child suckling the breasts of the earth, it really embodies that concept of ripening within the earth.
Jakob Baum, a German mystic of the early 1600s, believed that human life is a voyage through different stages of discovery.
Baum begins this voyage, which he presents to us through different layers of symbols, through the world of his expression, layer after layer, image after image, to a word.
A word so sacred, so powerful in its symbolism to people of faith, that it may not be uttered aloud.
And we see that same or very reminiscent human figure turning first toward the world and then toward the word of origin.
As attention to architectural detail increased with the rise of Gothic cathedrals, so too did the evolution of illuminated books depicting the New Testament. The Library of Congress houses a number of these masterpieces.
And you see this wonderful concern with color and texture and light and shading in the illuminated books that begin in the 13th century Book of Hours and that lead to the really magnificent creation of the Roberge Hours, where you have very warm and compelling icons of the Christian faith.
The Book of Hours arose from the culture of Catholicism. These highly detailed miniature portraits of Christ's life are surrounded by detailed artwork in the margins that shows a reverence for the flora and fauna of nature.
These works are rendered on parchment, which is known to last for hundreds and hundreds of years, so that, like the cathedral, when you build a book, you are giving something to posterity. You're expressing the great beliefs of your culture and your time, and you're also expressing a belief in transmission of that culture.
Religious expression remains an important part of society, but today, many of the traditional forms of worship do not bind us together as they once did. In a revival of sorts, there are artists who work experimentally with congregations, connecting them to their religious roots using new symbolic imagery.
I came to believe that that it was important for the church to have their symbol language resurrected. It's a rich tradition, and it's lying in wait for contemporary artists to come along. And of course, working in abstraction or in non-objective ways where there is no recognizable imagery at all is often difficult for a congregation. And yet, if you educate them in what the traditional image was all about and how non-relevant such a traditional kind of picture cycle is today, and that the way to go is through abstraction and non-objectivity, I find that communities come on board and that they don't walk past an image anymore. Rather, they're challenged by an image.
The present generation may be embracing new icons of worship, but in many communities, the parade along Main Street still follows the old path of the religious processional. The folklorists at the Library of Congress have studied this aspect of traditional expression in several communities in the United States.
I don't think that the religious processionals are disappearing. If anything, I think that they may be re-emerging. People more and more are looking for ways to express themselves. A traditional procession in the old world would symbolize one thing, and that would be faith. But when you have a procession in a multi-ethnic community, it becomes even more symbolic. The statement is not just a statement internally to the community that's carrying on through the procession, but to the community outside of theirs that is watching. It reinforces the importance of understanding symbols, other people's symbols, because every community has more than one set of symbols. And the symbols are the shorthand, they're the code words. And if you don't understand what's behind them, then you don't understand anything at all.